Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Coaching Question podcast. We are continuing our journey into the world of transactional analysis with our fourth scenario. As you know, this is a conversation with me, Gregor Finlay, and Sarah Turner, two experienced executive coaches. And we really want to bring you things that were useful in the context of coaching. And we're continuing with our second individual, our avatar, and that's a chap called Adam. He's the 45-year-old male marketing director, recently promoted, and he's struggling, and this is his first manager of manager role. So, Sarah, what's the scenario we're talking about this time?
Yeah, thanks, Gregor. So again, this is a situation where HR have contacted us and said, we've got this individual, we think they're great. However, they are facing some challenges. We'd love you to come in and support them. And for Adam, he was actually part of the team, and then he was promoted. And this is something we often see in coaching, isn't it? Where you've got a colleague who's then promoted to be one above, who then needs to manage colleagues who may also be friends. And organisations often don't necessarily think about offering coaching as part of that shift, as part of that change. And so Adam's working really hard. He's trying to really focus on pleasing other people. So if we think about drivers from a TA perspective, he's really wanting to, still be their friend, not have that gap between him and his direct reports. He's also showing the drive of being strong. And so he's tending to just take a lot on himself, kind of keep his head down, barrel on through, and not really ask for help. And all of that, I guess, translates into, he really feels that he's okay when he is doing both of those things. I'm strong, I'm capable, and I'm pleasing other people.
Yeah, and when we were talking about this, we were thinking this is sort of a simpler scenario than the last one. But actually, for him, is deeply, deeply challenging because his unconscious drivers of wanting to please others, be everybody's friend, and be strong means he continues to do the work. And we were thinking, well, this really also brings in this whole concept of strokes. That people as human beings need strokes, units of recognition. And he's been getting all of his recognition for doing the hard work and for being this really likable fellow, etc. And he just can't do performance management because it really works against all of that stuff. But the underlying thing, Sarah, you came up with this really interesting phrase, was the thing that you value may be the thing you're robbing others of. Can you say a bit more about that?
Yeah, so it's often the case. I notice it in coaching when a client is, so if we take Adam, if he's learned that he feels good when he does things that other people want and he doesn't make a fuss about it, then he's actually, if he's then taking on, for example, the work of his team at the weekend because they haven't met a deadline, he says, "Oh, don't worry about it," and he does it himself because he wants to make sure it's done. Then he's actually potentially robbing the opportunity to have the same sensation, the same quality or unit of recognition that he so values from that team member without realizing that's what he's doing. So it comes from a good place, but actually for that team member, that task has been taken away from them. On the one hand, they might think, great, I haven't had to do it. But on the other hand, maybe there's an opportunity there that's been missed, a piece of learning or an opportunity for visibility or higher profile or, whatever it could be.
Yeah, and I think that is really relevant for when we were talking about delegation in the last podcast. But I think it's also when you think about recognition, like where has he got his recognition from? Where has he been getting all of his strokes from? This is his first manager of manager's role. He needs to completely stop the doing now. And if that's where he's been getting his recognition from, where does he get it from now? So he has to replace that with something else. There's no point just saying, like we say, one of the best coaching questions is, what do you need to let go of? He needs to let go of those things, but he needs to replace them. Where is he going to get his strokes from? So there's this underlying thing I think we need to be cognizant of when working with him is he's losing his source of strokes.
And that's where what I was saying, I think, can be quite useful, because if he can then reframe that and realise, actually, by saying to this individual, no, I really want you to do this piece of work because you're going to get X, Y, Z out of it, he's actually allowing himself to kind of give that individual the recognition and the opportunity rather than having it for himself. And so it gives him a different lens, a different way of thinking about it. And I mean, it was just making me think of a podcast. I can't remember which season it was, possibly one or two, where we were doing the leadership pipeline, and we were just talking about, when you have a shift in terms of your role and the shape and the remit and the seniority of your role, it really does invite and require, maybe even demand is a stronger word, a real reevaluation of your modus operandi. How do I operate in my job now, and how is that different to what I did before? And to your point, what is it I need to let go of?
Yeah, and the book would say a shift of values, and there
Yeah.
certainly is a shift of values, and that's one of the things we would always be talking about here is exploring their values. I think the other thing to think about him is we know from discussions with him, we think he is an MBTI feeling type. He's done an MBTI, he comes out with a feeling type preference. And we're not going to go into that now, but essentially, it's really important for him to be liked.
Yeah.
And he does not enjoy conflict. He really hates any thought of conflict. And so that means that, again, with these other preferences, other unconscious drivers, performance management, he's just struggling with it.
And what might be interesting, I was just thinking then about challenges for the coach, is he might even want you to like him as his coach.
Absolutely. I think, again, there's a danger of being pulled into rescuer or even colluding in rescuing when talking about employees.
And where I've often seen that come up could be either when a client is a little bit stuck, as in stuck in the coaching session. So when we might start a session, what do you want to talk about today? They'll be like, I don't really know. What do you think? And the temptation is to go, well, why don't we pick up on where we were last time? And you have to stop yourself and go, interesting.
Well, I think one of the things you were talking about when we were discussing this was thinking about his motivation, but to really get him to connect with the consequences of inaction.
Yeah, so this is really, for me, it's a question of, well, how sustainable is this? Actually, let's just look at the reality of the situation you're in right now, which is, crazy long working hours, working weekends, not asking for help. Potentially, I wouldn't necessarily want to label it as such, but I might be curious about possible signs of burnout, exhaustion. What does the next year, 2, 3 look like if you carry on down this road? And really, really kind of confronting the challenge, confronting the client with the challenge that they're facing, and getting them to really be honest with themselves.
It's really when I'm looking at the mind map that we do. We always do a mind map before these podcasts, and I'm thinking, once you've got that background information of the TA, we're thinking about the strokes, we're thinking about what his drivers are and how to deal with them. You're back to your different coaching technique. But one of the things that I think is we've not really gone into is the where sequence, but getting critical feedback will cause his psychological defenses to come up. So if what we don't want him to do is get defensive with us, and he doesn't necessarily want, he's really terrified of his people getting defensive with him. So I think if we are getting into feedback with him, we don't want to be criticizing his behavior. We want to be quite sensitive to that.
Yeah.
We want to be, especially with a please other driver, you would start with feeling. You say, how do you feel about this situation? So, okay, as you feel that, what do you think would be a good way forward? And get into process, but not get straight into his behavior not being appropriate. That would be a real trap for this sort of individual. That makes sense?
Yeah, it does. And so much of that for me comes, as you say, it's actually the classic kind of the importance of the coaching relationship. and how we have contracted for how we're going to work together. And of course, we'd revisit that every session anyway. But actually, actually making sure that our working alliance is one that feels safe, where he feels able to trust us, so that it's not, we wouldn't, if we're offering some feedback or we're offering an observation, it's offered from a place of curiosity rather than from a place of judgment, which is quite different, right? And again, in many ways, using our coaching relationship as a lens through which he could look at how he might offer coaching, and a coaching led approach to managing his team. Again, how does he set up if he's going to have a feedback conversation? We talked about this in our feedback podcast, which was season 1 of season 2. I can't remember. I should really check these things out first. But where we talk about having the conversation about the conversation, and what we mean by that is, and that was something you said, which is it's about setting up the psychological safety, setting up the container, for the conversation we're going to have, so that the other person's psychological defenses are as down as they can be. They're not coming in on red alert, ready to respond, ready to bite back, ready to be defensive, which is the frightening stuff, right? No one wants to be in that situation.
And I think that's where, some coaches would be, I'm never going to give any input. But I think for people like this in this situation, those are things we talked about, you said you were going to do this, and this is what happened. Let's talk about the gap. That's totally non-threatening. If they've never seen good examples of how to give critical feedback, etc., and get into that conversation, they may need some tips in this area. And that, I don't think that's a problem. But what you were saying really made me think about the order in which we've approached this.
Mm-hmm.
The right thing, I would handle the delegation issue first, because that's going to free up some time and give you time to build trust, because this is actually a more personally threatening thing for him.
Mm-hmm.
This having difficult conversations and the threat of conflict, I think, is probably going to be really psychologically challenging for him.
And it's interesting because it's also just hearing you say that, then it's going to be psychologically challenging for him. I think it's also going to be somatically challenging for him. His body is going to fight back. His body is going to resist, whether that's a knot of tightness in his stomach, sweaty palms, increased heart rate. Could be a range of different things. Everyone's different. But actually, we can work kind of intellectually in the head, thinking through what's a feedback model you might use, or what are some coaching questions you can ask, which is all great stuff. But actually, if his body is absolutely kicking off and go, absolutely no way can I do this, I'm absolutely petrified, it's not going to happen. And so that's when we start thinking about, if you're a coach who is comfortable working in this space, really exploring what's happening in the body here. How can we connect the whole system and start to free things up, so we're getting a little bit of flow and finding a place for you, Adam, that is authentic and real and true for you, which might be different to me or Gregor. And that's fine, because that's what we're doing here, But it's understanding that those are your drivers, understanding that's your learned, conditioned tendencies, but also understanding that there is a job that needs to be done here, and that maybe there's a need to do a bit of a shift, a bit of a reframe, a bit of a slightly different way of approaching this to how you have done before.
So I think from a TA perspective, it's thinking about where the strokes are going to come from. Where's he going to replace his source of strokes, to get him to think about his identity and his role.
Yeah, and actually, one of the things I was thinking about, and coming back to the drivers, I was just thinking people who are listening to this might be thinking, okay, so you've talked about those drivers. How do you work with that in coaching then? Right? And I know we've sort of probably touched on this before, but with Adam, because he's got such a strong drive to please other people and be strong, therefore not ask for help, right? He's got both of those, hasn't he? One of the ways we can think about drivers is, what are the allowers, which is a way of starting to, A, recognize that's what my drive, that's what I'm inclined to do. B, how do I start to loosen that grip? How do I kind of soften that a little bit? So with please others, it's about pleasing myself, isn't it? So if we take the example of Adam, doing Gregor's work at the weekend because Gregor hasn't met a deadline, that's clear evidence of, I'll please Gregor so that he doesn't get the stress of the weekend. I'll take that on myself and be strong. Well, what would please Adam, actually? rather than thinking about what would please Gregor, what would please Adam. Maybe Adam wants to go to the gym or see his friends or have a social life or whatever at the weekend. And so, okay, right, hang on a second. What would please me as the manager here is for Gregor to do his job. It's for Gregor to meet the deadline that I've asked him to meet. And so it's a really useful way of just switching and providing the client with a bit of a strategy to think about, hang on a second, let me just pause here. What's going on? What am I allowing to kind of drive or propel my behaviour here?
So I might work with a client to help them develop a technique by which they would turn that driver off before and engage. If that driver's going to kick in, I always have to please them. Okay, so what would please? And so, like, it might be a little exercise, like before that meeting, just sit down with a bit of paper and write down what would please me. Not the things you actually want to get out of the meeting, but it would please me if they offered me, or they admired my new suit. Not that we wear suits very much anymore, but I'm thinking in old days. But you know what I mean? They're just silly things to make sure I've turned off that driver before I have that thing. So they're dealing with it consciously. So yeah, that's a great example. And the same with be strong is ask for help. And that's where feed forward comes really in. You might say, do you have an example of who's really good in your organization at doing performance management? Right. Well, identify those people. Let's go and have feed forward conversations and ask them what is it that they do that means that they're good at that. Yeah. So they go and actively do that, and they're asking for help. So they're turning off their plays others, they're turning off their be strong drivers.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really good example of how we might progress with that.
Yeah, and I think it's a couple of things. I think it illustrates how valuable TA can be in coaching, because it gives us a way in which we can listen to, really tune into our client's language and pick up on possible drivers, or you can always use, there is a questionnaire you can use if you want to go down that road. But also then it's quite accessible for clients. They understand it, it's quite simple, and they go, right, I know that's what I tend to do, therefore this is my strategies I'm going to put in place. The other thing I like to think about when I'm sort of talking about this is I kind of use this metaphor of a tennis ball. So where I've got a client who is inclined to take responsibility, right, for something, often it does show up with a please others driver, is, are they holding the tennis ball themselves when actually they should be throwing it to their team member? And if their team member is throwing back to them, are they catching it and holding on to it? Are they going, nope, that's yours? Or it could be coming back to the ask for help. Who else can I throw this tennis ball to? So that it's not, have I got all the balls kind of in this massive bag that I'm kind of dragging around, and the moment it's really heavy, how many of those can I actually get rid of? Are they all mine? And it's a little bit like the 1 Minute Manager Gets the Monkey book as well, isn't it? Speaks to delegation, but I'm a visual thinker, so I quite like that idea, that sort of idea of working with tennis balls and who's got what.
I think the other thing that comes up here is also talking, and the OK corral can be really useful here.
Yeah.
So the OK corral in terms of I'm okay, you're okay, I'm okay, you're not okay, I'm not okay, you're okay, I'm not okay, you're not okay. Because if you talk about being passive or aggressive, and I was working with an actors company called Frank Partners, and they had this little trick. What they do is they get two pieces of A4 with passive and aggressive on it, and they put them down on the ground and say, okay, so between passivity and aggression, where does assertiveness fit? And everybody just automatically tried to fit it on this line of emotion between passivity and aggression. So aggression is I'm okay, you're not okay. Passivity is I'm not okay, you're okay. And assertiveness does not exist on that line. It's not emotional. It's coming from a position of I'm okay, you're okay. I have a right to assert my position. You have a right to assert your position. And certainly assertiveness is really, really valuable in performance management and also upwards management. So I think a discussion around passive aggressive and the OK corral, you say, okay, you've been passive with your boss. Okay, that's what you've talked about. You don't want to be that anymore, but you don't want to be aggressive either. You want to be assertive. You want to be coming from I'm okay, you're okay. And then I sometimes have my default question, but I ask clients to come up with their own question. But my default question before they enter an engagement with someone else is, what's my intent towards this other person?
Yeah.
because that will uncover where they are on the OK Corral.
Yeah.
And get them to think and get back to, what do I need to do to be, I'm okay, you're okay.
Yeah.
So I think that discussion about passivity and aggression is a really, really good area to work on. In the TA terms, you're working with the OK Corral.
No, I really like that.
We should do our 3 tips.
We should. So I guess where I would start with, this I would say this is probably quite a classic kind of a coaching issue that can come up, in my experience anyway. And so, whether this might affect a listener personally, or maybe an HR person, or even a line manager with someone like this in their team, I think just a really valuable question is when someone feels very sort of stuck in a particular way of being, is just to ask that question: how sustainable is this? There's a coaching technique you can use around it, but essentially just asking the question, carrying on like you are for the next 6 months, next year, 2 years, 3 years, what are you looking at? What is the end result? What are you committed to? I know it's even if you go into conscious leadership, what are you unconsciously committed to? You're unconsciously committed to burning out. So just really asking that question, how sustainable is it? And then it's the follow-up question is, and what agency do you have here? What can you do differently so that actually that outcome changes?
I think another tip, I mentioned it already in this thing, but really when you're thinking about feedback, when people's psychological defenses come up, that will be you've gone down a trapdoor. So be conscious, certainly with please others and be perfect drivers, never to directly talk about behaviour, because that's a trapdoor. And just keep away from a trapdoor. The approach to thinking, approach to feeling, as long as you're not going through that trapdoor of behaviour, I think that would be my tip when it comes to this sort of area.
Yeah. And when you say trapdoor, you're talking about the where sequence, which is a whole other piece of TA that we probably aren't going to go into on this podcast, but just if people are interested, they can look at that.
Yeah, and where is spelled WARE, and I'm sure we'll find a link and put it in the show notes.
Yeah. Okay, and then my last one, again, also something I mentioned, but it's just this really simple question to ask yourself of, what is it that I value that I might be robbing other people of unintentionally? Because that can be a really useful, invitation to go, how does that land? How does that sit with me, actually? It probably doesn't sit that comfortably. Okay, what do I need to do differently? Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time to listen to our show. We really do appreciate your feedback. If there's more that you'd like to hear about TA and the way we use it in coaching, please do get in touch. You can reach us at info@thecoachingquestion.com. And as Gregor said, there'll be a few more details in the show notes. And again, please do give us a rating on iTunes or whatever is your preferred podcasting or video platform, because it does help us spread the word to a wider audience. All right, great. Well, thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.